The button has been hit. Hello, and welcome to the GauntletCon 2019 panel on GMing powered by the Apocalypse games. Now, of course, the first question you might have is, what is a powered by the Apocalypse game? Oh, long 10 years ago in tabletop role-playing games history, Vincent and McGay Baker released Apocalypse World, and it blew many people's minds, or at least mine, and I pretend that other people also had blown minds. And that game started a whole system, and there were a bunch of people who designed new games that used some of the core mechanics of it, and they were all called games that were powered by the Apocalypse. And while there's a lot of DNA that's shared across those games, there's also many things that are slightly different. And if you already know what I'm talking about, you might be saying to yourself, Rich, what's this GMing PbtA? Well, actually, you should say MCing. Well, go ahead and take an experience point. If you keep it up, maybe you'll have an advance by the end of this panel. I am the moderator. I am Rich Rogers. I use the he, him pronouns, and I am very excited because this panel is chock full of gaming and GM geniuses. None of them are me. I'm just, see the thing, moderator. That's me. All right, so first I am excited to bring on Marissa M.K. Kelly from Magpie Games. Marissa is a award-winning author and designer of Epyllion and Bluebeard's Bride, as well as many others, and a renowned con GM, and I am excited to have you on. Hello, Marissa.
Hi, Rach. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. And next we have Phil Vecchione of Encoded Designs. Phil is one of the original Gnome Stew authors, which does tons and years worth of, I think, what do you guys have now? 46,000 articles on GMing. Is that right?
Yeah, something. I think. I mean, I know I'm well over 200 myself. So
there you go. We just multiply that by, I don't know, X factor. Co-host of the Misdirected Mark and She's a Super Geek podcasts, and designer of Hydro Hackers, along with many other RPGs, which we won't mention because they're not PbtA. Fair?
That's fair.
Last but certainly not least, my partner in crime for the Plus One Forward podcast, con organizer on hiatus, MCing pro, Rach Shelkey. What?
It's Rach Shelkey.
Rach Shelkey Kelly. Something. Rach Shelkey. Hey, Rach. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for inviting me on. I use the she, her pronouns, and that's about it. If you've listened to Plus One Forward, you already know some of Rich and I's thoughts on MCing or GMing, depending on which particular Powered by the Apocalypse game you're playing.
That is right. In fact, there are some times that I may just push my glasses up and say, hey, we have an episode that might delight you if you want answers to that. But I'll try not to actually anybody. I just like to push up my glasses because my nose is very short. We submitted to the Slack for the Gauntlet community, and we also posted up on Twitter and the Gauntlet forums. Basically, as far social media as we could reach out with our stubby fingers and hands, trying to get questions for these experts, and I have a number of them that I will be presenting. Also, we have a bunch of people who are watching it live on YouTube. Hey, Blake, Pat, Adrian, and S.L. Watson, and GauntletCon 2019. There we go, waving hello wildly and applauding. Thank you guys so much for your support. We're so excited to talk to you. So the first question that I'll lead off with is from Westy Wilner. What advice do you have for incorporating Powered by the Apocalypse moves and principles into more traditional RPGs like D &D?
The world's greatest role-playing game.
So, MK, why don't you kick us off? What do you think about this?
Sure. Well, we've tried to do this a lot, and we've pretty much found that moves are not going to jive well because it's a very different kind of game and it works on sort of a different axis, if you will. So principles, those are very easy to port over, but something like using a move out of a game like a Powered by the Apocalypse game, those moves sort of, as I like to think of, are kind of cogs in a big machine. And if you pull out one of those cogs, it no longer moves the rest of that machine. So it's very hard to plug it into a different game that uses pulleys or some other type of mechanism and that isn't a cog, and have that cog actually be effective. So you can kind of do it, but I've found that it just doesn't really sing the way it would in an actual fully fleshed out PbtA game.
Cool. Okay. Well, that stinks. I thought, hold on. Are we just saying it doesn't work at all? Rach, what do you think?
So I wouldn't take moves and put them into your D&D game or any other trad game, a game that's not powered by the apocalypse, because it's like, well, say if I want to take something from West End Star Wars and plop it into D&D, that's also not going to mechanically work. You're taking a D20 based system and trying to shove in parts from a D6 based system, completely different D6 based system. I do think principles are an interesting thing to come back to, though, because while you might not be using the whole constellation of agenda, principles, and MC moves, you could use principles as a self-reflective exercise to think about what you want to get out of your trad game and just sort of areas you want to guide your game and your GM style to. So, for example, I idly looked through Dungeon World's principles, and one of the principles is name all your NPCs. Maybe in your D&D game, you feel your NPCs aren't really fleshed out. They don't even have names. They're just like the barkeep or the tavern owner. So maybe you can use that as saying, like, this is a goal I want to get out of my game or a goal I want to get out of my GMing, and use those to sort of guide and reshape your skills from there.
Cool. Phil, anything you want to throw in?
Yeah, I mean, I would say along the same lines with principles, right? Principles are portable, just because they're declarative statements, right? About how you want to run the game. And so Free League, the makers of things from the Flood and Tales from the Loop, they use principles in their game and put them right up front, within the first 10 pages, and it really sets, in both cases, in both of those books, it really sets the tone. Especially because those two games have very different tones, right? One's about the innocence of childhood, and the other one's kind of the angsty teen version of it. And the principles change. Just a few principles change between the two of them, but by doing that, it creates a very different tone for both books. So yeah, I think that, from a design point of view, absolutely. And if you're doing that for your own campaign, you absolutely can do that for your own campaign. You can say what this campaign is and is not about. So, you can do it as a ahead of time, or you can easily do it as a session 0 exercise and do it collaboratively.
Cool. And then I'm going to give the slightly dickish answer of saying, maybe you should try getting your D&D players to try Dungeon World, or if they like anthropomorphic animals, Root. There are a number of games that can scratch that fantasy itch that are powered by the Apocalypse games. You probably already knew that, but I was going to say it anyway. Let's move on. Ludovico Martins Alves has a question for us, and I will show it here. How do you avoid mixing moves, minor rules differences, GM moves and principles and agendas among the different powered by the Apocalypse games? Holy crap, I really want to know the answer to this one, because I do a lot of this, and sometimes it gets painful. So what's some advice that we have for Ludo here?
I can start if anyone else, unless
Go for it, Rach.
I print out a copy of the MC guides and the support paperwork and just follow those. And if I look for a tool that instinctively in my head, that I should be there. So I think it's with Rita Citra, Rita Person. There's something missing from Monster of the Week in our 101 campaign. I keep wanting to reach for it. It's sort of a reminder to go and be like, oh yeah, that's not a tool here, but I do have these other tools here. So, I mean, that's basically it. Just have what your game needs in front of you so you can always reference it. And as a sidebar, I feel that within the GMing community, we put a lot of stress on GMs to internalize the whole game and know everything off the top of their head. If you ever find yourself in a position where you don't know it, it's totally legit to take a couple minutes and say, hey, I just want to look that up. I'm not sure why we kind of look down on that practice. I mean, professionally speaking, that's like the secret cheat word for doing your pharmacy boards. If anyone's listening, is like, I don't know the answer, but can I get a contact number for you and I'll get back to you about that. Also totally acceptable for GMing.
Nice. I'm going to bounce it over to Phil. What do you think about this? How do you not mix it up?
I mean, I think, I think when you get, I think there are a couple moves in certain games, right, that are always, that overlap, right? Like I always think of, in terms of mixing moves, right, defend and hack and slash in Dungeon World often, can look like they'll start to blend, and it's really about intent, right? So it's what is your intent, right? Like you can say, I rush up in front of the orc, and it's like, but are you trying to protect? Are you trying to protect your friend, or are you trying to harm the orc? Like which one of these? Because then that intent will lead you to what move actually really gets triggered. So I definitely do that. And then just to kind of go off of what Rach said, right? I have a GMing kit for every PbtA game that I run that has all the move sheets, multiple copies. I have a GMing sheet. I think I've even made them when other designers haven't put them in. So I've actually gone ahead and made my own. And then like Blake Ryan said, who knows me pretty well, I laminate all that stuff. That's all durable now. Like I can, it lasts from session to session. So yeah.
Cool. MK, you got anything you wanted to throw in?
I agree with everybody else. I think the only thing I would add is that I really feel like the fiction comes first before naming the move. So even if I tend to mix up the name of a move from different games, that, like Phil said, if I'm actually probing for what you're actually trying to do, what your intent is, that kind of comes first, and the triggers will do that naturally, because a really tight PbtA game reinforces its themes through the moves and agendas, and it really doesn't seem to work when suddenly I'm using a Dungeon World move in the middle of a Masks game that seems to not actually jive very well. And the ones that do seem similar between certain PbtA games, that generally it's just the name of the move that I tend to mix up if I mix anything up. I'm not sure that's very helpful to be like, I don't have this problem, but I think that they already covered printing out stuff is very helpful. Having your players help you as well. If I miss a move and it seems to have triggered at a convention or something, I'll usually let the players know that they can do that. Just say, hey, it seems like they triggered this. Is that right? And then we move on from there. So.
Yeah, just a little story from Demigod's PbtA where I didn't have the two monitors set up because I was at a physical table. I did not see one of the move sheets, and so there were literally 3 moves that we didn't engage for an entire session until afterwards when I was looking through my notes going, man, there's stuff that's missing in this game. And I'm like, oh, it's this page of moves. Oops. So I feel that Alexis Graf, aka Lex Master, and unfortunately the question's cut off just a little bit, but I'll add in the very end. When running Epyllion or PbtA games like it that don't actually have the possibility of PC death, how do you build that same tension and sense of danger that you get in more lethal games like D&D or COC? So I think we should start with Marissa on that one.
Sure. So for those people who don't know, Epyllion is a game about baby dragons, where you grow up in a dragon world being cute dragons, sort of like My Little Pony meets Spiral the Dragon. So there isn't a move for death. There isn't really a move for taking harm in a traditional sense. And I feel like with this question, I'm going to kind of twist it a little bit, because I think you're probably not trying to build the same kind of tension, but rather keep the tension, the death and pain are meaningful to your story. If you are trying to build similar tension, I think you probably need to play a different game, something like Cartel that supports lethality in its moves in a really like concrete way, and it changes how you play. So making Epyllion a lethal game will change what the game is technically about in like a big capital A sort of way. But to create the threat of mortality in Epyllion as written, I would suggest first building a plot that revolves around death. So explore what society thinks about death before asking the players to explore it personally. So like having an older dragon, for example, who's dealing with death, who might die, who is looking for a way to undo someone's death, something like that. So once the party knows that death exists in the setting and how it exists in the fiction, then you can subvert it and play like any other theme. So have one of them accidentally pass through like a cool gate and die, right? And then, or maybe have them use moon magic to bring them back. If when you're dead in your fiction, you get to float around as a ghost and talk to people, but you can't affect them, like let that happen and then maybe bring them back from it, just like any other thing. But fiction does matter, and just like in any other PbtA game, the moves are there to, alleviate moments of uncertainty. So if a dragon should die, but there's no death move, then they generally should die. Like that still happens. That's still a thing that can happen, even if there isn't a move for it.
Cool. Rach, did you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, my approach would be to sort of not look at the game, but look at you and your party first and ask questions about why for you and your group, PC death has an emotional payoff, because understanding that and doing some reflection on that might help you piece together what you're actually looking to get out of. Or get out of that situation. So for me, PC death really isn't a big thing. Like I experienced enough death in my day job that it's not super exciting for me at the table. But that doesn't say I don't like, that isn't to say I don't like tension at the table, but I like tension between you have two terrible situations. You have to figure out which of the two outcomes you want to go with because you feel you can mitigate that better in the long run. That's what excites me and thrills me. And I think that type of tension is a little bit more universal in Powered by the Apocalypse games that don't feature like lethal death or it's very hard to kill off a PC. But I can't answer what thrills you about death for you or your players. So you're going to have to start asking those questions and reflecting on what scares your character, what would drive them to action, what stops them from sleeping at night, and then piecing together what to bring into your game based off those answers.
Cool. Phil, did you have anything to throw in?
I'm going to fall in line with all of that. I think that there are other stakes that you can put at play. There's consequences for failing to get things done. There are things in the world, the setting that the characters live in that can be permanently changed if they fail, right? That can be equally intense. In some ways, I mean, I don't know. In some ways, D&D above a certain level is more of a resource problem than anything else, because you just go get resurrected, right? Like, so I don't know. I think you can inflict a lot more tension and pain with things that are not death, because the players will have to persist through it. So yeah. So having things that happen that they have to deal with the next session and the session after that, or something that permanently changes the world, like that's, I think, a much bigger thing to deal with and can raise, a lot more tension in the game.
Yeah, I want to tell a quick story, I promise. It's Tales from the Loop, so it's not exactly PbtA, it's kind of adjacent. Mm-hmm. But it is a game that is where you're playing kids and there's no possibility of death. One of the characters of running this home game for the wife and son, wife's playing a bookworm archetype, and her dad works at the local library. So the very first thing I hit her with is, how does she do on a book report? Wow, there was some serious tension about not failing a book report and having to go home and tell dad. No threat of death. The threat of like pass or fail, you still have to go home and tell dad. So there's a lot of things that you can do to get tension without having to put death on the table. And I'm with you guys in that, death isn't always the scariest thing, because like, what are you going to do? Like, scratch out the name and write in a different name, play the same character. We're going to move on. David Walker asks about tips on asking great questions that co-build the fiction. Lead us off, Phil. What are some tips that you have on asking great questions?
Yeah, I mean, my general trigger, like internal trigger for when to co-build versus when to just declare something is anytime I'm about to fill in a detail, especially if it's going to be something bland, like, oh yeah, there's an innkeeper here, and the innkeeper's just puttering around. Like, at that moment, I'm like, wait, what would be more interesting is if there's something. If there's some problem with the relationship between the innkeeper and somebody in this party. So, then my immediate jump is to ask a leading question along the lines of, who here got thrown out of the inn the last time you were in town? Right. And that's the, let's spice it up a little. Let's create interesting tension, I think, is probably where I try to aim my leading questions, right? I want things to have interesting tension, not to shut things down, but just to complicate something that would be relatively simple, like checking in at the end.
Yeah, I find that very helpful, that assumptive close that already has like a twinge of trouble to it in kicking forward. Like, you may get there if you don't ask anything this got that assumption in, but you can jump ahead a couple moves to where we want to be anyway. I think that's really great, Phil. MK, you got any tips that you want to throw?
Sure. One is along those lines where it's like, if I don't have a badass answer, I'll just like give it back to them because I'm kind of lazy. So I'll be like, oh, like something should be happening here. I will ask my players because they have good ideas. And if they don't, then I'm probably not playing with them a lot. So I use it as maybe it's I think there's a thing in Urban Shadows where we talk about fat words, and i.e. words that conceal more than they reveal. So an example would be like, oh, everyone knows that vampire is bad. And then what you do is sort of interrogate that. Who is everyone? Okay, let's define that together. How do they know? Let's define that together. And how do we, the audience, know that they're bad? So those sorts of, words are able to, facilitate a richer world that is co-building the fiction, because basically you are working through the details, even from just a simple, NPC description where you're like, oh, everyone thinks this vampire is bad. So let's explore what that means to you all, as well as to the story, as well as to the common everyday person.
Cool. Rach, what about you? Any tips you have?
So to go like the very basics of question answering, there's two basic types of questions: open-ended and closed-ended questions. Open-ended just gives the player more space to give you an answer. And I tend to lean open-ended questions where I want to go look for details. And usually I actively listen, and it sounds like I'm saying a bunch of buzzwords. I actively listen for anything that seems interesting or the seed of an idea in their descriptions, and then ask a further question to probe on that, to say, hey, tell me a little bit more about that, because it could be the character, the player has an idea of, well, maybe I could work this thing in, but might not feel very self-confident to co-build the fiction right away, or think they're overstepping. So lead them into having a little bit more space to flesh out an idea at the table, and to guide the questions back and forth. I know, speaking from personal experience, it took me a long time, both as a player and as a GM, to get used to that idea of asking active questions, because it also sounds like you're interrogating the player, or there's an understanding issue. So the game is a conversation. Have a conversation about the piece of fiction, and just make space for the player to build more fiction alongside you.
Cool. Thank you. Let's move on. Alexi Sargent has a question that unfortunately I tried to shorten and it got cut off a little bit, but I'll read it and we'll pop it up here. I'm discovering the utility of using montages and leading questions to fast forward action to near a point of climax. How legit is that as a go-to PbtA technique, and how can I make it work best for players and characters?
Well, I think it's totally legit. If you're running a one-shot, skipping forward is kind of crucial to get through, whether or not you're highlighting stuff about a system for people or just trying to get through a satisfying amount of story in a short amount of time. That's great. If you think your campaign also falls into that category, I think it's great to do that then too. Maybe if you're doing a super long campaign, hold back a little bit and sort of interrogate when you're doing those flash forwards. I also think love letters, where you write like a little leading question, usually to the players about, hey, what happened when this cool event took place in between the two sessions? Like, that's a good way to just skip forward without skipping mechanics or costs of consequences, stuff like that. Or just jumping in the middle of the most exciting parts sometimes is the best way to, skip forward too, where you're like, okay, well, this would be really kind of boring to see in the long term, so I'm going to skip ahead and get to the meaty parts that are more interesting to all of us.
Thanks, okay. Rach, did you have some thoughts?
Basically repeating what MK just said about montages and how they're a useful, valuable tool. Another space to consider them is at the end of session, particularly with one-shots. If you want to have your players walk away feeling like they've resolved things, I will set up a situation like, okay, describe to us either a quick scene of what your character is doing sometime later, or a popular technique I've seen in use with convention games is, if this was a TV show, what's the clip we see of your character on like the next episode preview? And those montages, I feel, work quite well to give some plot resolution as well as moving time forward.
Cool. Anything you want to throw in, Phil?
Yeah, not too much actually. I think montages are fantastic. I think jumping ahead in past the boring stuff is great. I don't think, especially when we run one shots at conventions or one shots online and things like that, don't think we have to play through all the scenes, all the connective stuff between scenes, right? Like aggressive scene montages, aggressive scene framing, things like that kind of jump us to the interesting parts. And you can use those leading questions to just cover the space in between, like what was the most interesting thing that happened as you raced across town, and then actually just start the action across town in the next scene.
Cool. One of the things I do. Oh, okay, you got something to throw in?
Well, just I'm happy to hear what you have to say. It reminded me what Phil said, is that I actually use them a lot at the very end of a campaign, or at a very end of like a convention game. So I'll flash forward if we've run out of time, and I'll be like, what's one cool thing you do? What's one cool thing you do? What's one cool thing you do during this boss fight? And then do a montage at the end that's like, where do we see your character in the future? Because we're never going to meet again. The story is over, but I want to give them like a cool highlight moment and satisfying ending. And that's also kind of like a cool way to slot it in.
I want to throw in that this is cheating a little bit, so that's why I went last. One of the things for montages that I sometimes do is if I have a hard move and I realize that the current situation doesn't exactly fit where my idea is tickling or what hard move I want to go, I'll like montage people forward, like, oh yeah, you do this cool thing you wanted to do, blah, blah, blah. And then I throw them straight into, failing forward into the next situation. So I'll narrate forward a montage of general successes to slap them in the face with the hard move that comes forward. All right, I'm going to move on to a question from Dan Brown. So Dan Brown asked 3 questions, one about after the game, middle of the game, some questions that kind of similar to what we just answered. So I want to I'm jumping ahead, I'm montaging ahead to Dan Brown's question, which is about prep. Before the session, what's your signature approach to prep for Powered by the Apocalypse games? What's the one thing you do before a session that you think makes your GMing unique? Phil, lead us off. Hit us with that Gnome Stew wisdom.
I think probably the tool that I use the most in pretty much any game, PbtA included, and I will fully admit I got it from Fear the Boot, which is the what's really going on here. So this is a couple of paragraphs to a page that I write to myself of, if no one interferes with what's going on, this is what's going to happen. And that kind of logical framework is like, once that's set up in my head, the ability to play off of what everyone's going to like do during the game is easier, because I know, like, well, if no one had interfered with this, X, Y, and Z would have happened. Now that they're interfering with this, how does that change? What would our opposition do to try to make their outcome happen again? Those kinds of things. So I always start with just that one page, and if I prep anything else, it's extra, but that thing is the center point of all my prep.
It's really cool. That reminds me of kind of the town feature in Dogs on the Vineyard, which I kind of feel like is a little bit of a proto PbtA style game, and the idea of generating your town and knowing where things are, which I think of that whenever I first saw a countdown clock. So that totally makes sense to me. Rach, what is your signature move as a GM for prep?
I don't know if it makes me unique, but what I like to do is I like to pick out about 5 NPCs that I know have a current game plan in the works and figure out what are those characters doing outside of our player characters. How are those goals at odds with various player characters, and what tools do those NPCs need from perhaps other player characters? So if my player characters decide to get stalled out early in the session, I have a handful of tools to prod them with and generally fuck up their day. We're allowed to curse here, right?
Well, we just did, so yes.
Yay! So that's my thing.
Cool. Thank you so much, Rach. My signature approach, I don't know if it makes my GMing unique, but if it's a game that is the first session, I mostly listen to music and read over the moves. If it's subsequent sessions, I pace around the room and freak out while thinking about all the things that they were doing. And also, my games are on YouTube, so I go watch like at least the last 20 minutes of the previous session, and especially the Roses and Thorns, because I figure if I only have half an hour to prep, I at least want to know what I fucked up last time. See, there we go. I'm in solidarity with the F words for you, Rach. That was it.
Well,
cool.
now we're R-rated and no longer PG-rated.
Oh my goodness. All of my YouTube fundage is gone, of which I've never made.
All of that sweet, sweet streaming money.
So much. Andrew H. asked a few questions as well. I'm going to jump straight ahead to the one that I most want to hear about. How can I learn to work more positive outcome moves into my GMing or MCing? Andrew thinks that he's just too mean. Who would like to tackle this one first?
I'll take it. Oh, well, right. Marissa also put up her hand. Do Marissa.
Marissa did her hand, and she's the polite one. She raised her hand. You get to go first.
Either way. I think that I think it's important to keep in mind that when they miss or something like that, that it's not time to hit them in the face always. It's not a failure. Many of the GM moves ask you for orthogonal directions. So if you're not failing and something else is happening, that does tend to make them feel cool in the moment and like they're still like doing their thing. So yeah, you accomplish what you were doing and you notice that somebody is watching you from the shadows, or that some other move that doesn't have to do with the thing that they just literally did can help it feel more positive as an outcome overall. And I think that what you really want to do is make sure that your PCs keep feeling cool and awesome. And the way to do that, in my opinion, is to make sure that they keep overcoming adversity, because, nothing makes a hero cooler than defeating a really cool villain, and from whatever definition that fits within your game.
Thanks, MK. Rach.
Similar to what MK said, I like to think of it, maybe thinking of it as a positive outcome might be restricting your train of thought a little bit, and thinking about it as a lateral outcome, or yes, you didn't succeed, but you shift it one to the left. So now you have a different perspective on the situation, and that's what you're gaining from your failure, rather than getting something that's fully positive. Like, say, okay, so you didn't succeed on your keep your cool move, but announce off-screen badness, the position you land in, suddenly you're now aware that there's something coming at you, but you have time to react.
Cool. Phil, anything you want to throw in?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the give them what they were trying for with unintended consequences. So yes, the thing you did worked. It worked so well that the reactor casing across the room is broken, and now an ominous green light is starting to shine through. Right, like those kinds of things where. Yes, you did roll a 6-, and yes, I'm going to make a hard move, but you still did the cool thing. It's just you did it so well, you've created a new problem in its place.
Yeah, I'm going to throw in a thing that's just orthogonal, because that's how my brain goes when I hear more positive outcome moves. And this is more of a soapbox. On a 7 to 9, it is a mixed success. It's a mixed success. Keep in mind that word success, there are so many games that I play in where the mixed success feels like a failure. And I really don't want that to, like, what it causes people to get gun shy, and they start to avoid moves, and then it gums up the works, and the whole economy of the game will start to stutter a bit. And for lack of a better term, you get to the point where people are like, how can I avoid going into dice to do the thing that I want? And then all of a sudden we're in free form, and who wants to be there? I'm joking. There are some people who want to be there just because I don't want to be there. I like rules. I like mechanics that make me make hard choices, not mechanics that when I get a 7 to 9, I feel like I screwed up and don't get an XP. So that's my thing. Andrew H had another one. I'm going to stick with Phil on this one. How do you decide when to swing hard with a GM or NC move, and how hard do you swing?
So maybe in this case, I'm somewhat of a softie on this. I like soft moves before hard moves, right? So I like if I'm going to plan to hit you hard in the scene, I will inevitably line up something either in the fiction or during a previous 6- that telegraphs that. So, like, I'm not a big fan of just going right for the hard move on a 6- unless the fiction makes that perfectly clear. Like, I jumped into the dragon's mouth to attack it, and I rolled a 6-. Yeah, then I'm just gonna deal out some damage. But otherwise, I like to telegraph my hard moves so that when it hits, we all saw it coming. So that may make me a softie, but I'm okay with that.
We heard it here. Phil, Gnome Stew author, Misdirected Mark guy, softie. MK, what about you? How do you decide when to swing hard?
I think I tend to swing hard in the general sense most of the time, as just a default. There's no, it's a spectrum for your hard and soft, like if you're doing your GM move and it's dramatic and interesting to you as the GM, then the players will probably find it interesting as well. If your GM move that you're making is If you feel like you're not actually making the move you want to move, they will probably pick up on that too.
Cool. Rach, what about you?
All right, so I just noticed what I wrote in my notes last night, and I wish to quote directly from it, which is, I do what I want. I just go with my gut in terms of what feels narratively correct at this given point in time. Is this a point in time that really requires heavy emotional feels or heavy physical feels? Is it the middle of a fight? Or is it like a quiet, reflective scene that somehow has a botched role in it? That's really going to drive how hard I hit. Or if we're in a little bit of lull in the story and we need to move things along, then I'll drive something that's not hard, like doing damage hard, but definitely shoving the plot along.
Cool. I like it. Yeah, that's cool. I've got a couple of questions that are similar. I'm going to throw one of them onto the screen, but know that Nicholas, aka K-Real, also asked a kind of tag on, but there's only so much text I can get onto the thing, so let me hide this one. Oh, my tech is failing me. All right. Moves are designed to snowball, which can make it feel like the players never have a moment to catch their breath. How do you create times with less tension without ignoring moves entirely? And then Nicholas's add-on is how same question, especially when your players are rolling 6-1 after the other. So who wants to tackle the move snowball into boringness? MK raising her hand because she's awesome. Go for it.
I think that a really good way to do this is just to raise the bar for what does actually trigger the move. So you aren't trying to persuade someone until you really push the point with them, for example. And again, if they're seems like they're rolling miss after miss after miss, like, to me, that's like a really cool opportunity for the story. But like, then again, your job as the MC is not to punish the players. If they miss and miss, then just change the frame, right? So La Sicaria rolls six misses, so she gets kidnapped instead of killed, right? Like John Wick, like the question asks, loses his puppy, and now he has a reason to leave his life as a veteran and come back to the game, right? Complication can be bad, but it also can just change the frame, right? So if you're worried about something that you can't take back, then change the frame. Be like, okay, well, we're trading harm right now, so how do I amp this up that doesn't include you dying? Or, wow, you've already missed to escape, so me as a GM, I'm hesitating to do this one move. What am I not hesitating to do? What does the story still have that is fun for me as a GM? Because that's all you can really control, and what seems fun for the players, right? Yeah, I'd say just go for it and make sure that if things are triggering too much and you're kind of annoyed with it, just raise the bar for what actually is triggering and when.
Nice. Phil, what do you have on the snowball move and the trap of making it boring? Because it's just that, what is that, the death spiral, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, this is that kind of beat analysis, right? When you have too many of one kind of beat, it becomes, monotonous or annoying. And so, yeah, like when you start to have this kind of, string of these bad rolls, and I mean, we say bad, but I mean, we'll call them like 6-minuses, right? Because I don't necessarily think they're bad. They're all opportunities. So one of the things you can do is you don't have to do anything immediately in the scene. So, you look at those moves that announce off-screen badness, right? Like, look at those moves that allow something else in the game to change that can come up later. I love moves like that where, somebody will roll a 6- and I'll be like, cool, the door opens and there's no one outside. And they'll stop and be like, really? And I'll be like, oh, yeah. And then, the camera cuts to this other thing and, I might hint to what else is going to happen. But you can take some of the, you can use those moves that take you out of the immediate scene and move it somewhere else as kind of a change in beat.
Nice. Rach, what about you?
As Phil and MK have mentioned, as the GM or the MC, you're the one who gets to decide how granular the roles are. I think there's an assumption that every time the player does something, you need to make a roll, and that's not always the case. You should be looking for if the fiction will be changing in some substantial way because the player character decide to, take an action. And remember, as the MC, you also have the ability to basically end things whenever you want. I mean, separate them is a great tool in your toolbox or your MC moves to basically kill a scene that's just doing miss after miss after miss and say, yeah, we're done here. We're going to move on to something more interesting.
I will say that this isn't my always answer. It's my sometimes answer, like Cookie Monster and cookies. Sometimes I will look at the list of GM moves, and after a few misses, I'll say, which one of these haven't I done in a while?
Yeah.
And then I'll just do that. And I'll shove it in there like a square peg into a round hole. And my goodness, does it often end up in surprising places. So it's your own risk, but it's definitely different. Sam Roberts asks, what do you do when a PC does something that feels both risky and germane to the game, but isn't covered by a move?
Yeah. Well, I think there are, depending on which PbtA game you're playing, there's quite a few that you might want to look at, which is like hold steady, act under fire, push your luck, unleash your powers, or whatever. Or you could just say what happens. So because there's no uncertainty there, you might just tell them what happens. You do it. You can't do that, right? This other thing is in your way. What do you do to get that thing out of your way? Or you can ask what happens. So if it's like a PvP moment, for example, and somebody is trying to take someone's backpack, like they have in the question further down, the PC is trying to take another PC's backpack. So I will ask what happens. It sounds like they would probably grab it away from you, right? No? Okay, cool. Then you, the person who's going to lose their backpack, you get to roll hold steady. So I think there's a lot of different ways, depending on what game you are actually playing, to determine whether or not there's a needs to be a roll. If you are triggering a move that you're not realizing that they're triggering, stuff like that.
Cool. Thanks, MK. Phil, what about you? What do you do when the PC is off book?
So I'm looking at everybody's notes. I think we almost have the same thing, right? There's almost always the bucket move, which is the move that like is generic enough that covers everything. So if that works, that's great. If that doesn't work, then yeah, I'm in line with Marissa on this, which is if there isn't a move, it doesn't trigger a move. So what happens? And then that's a great place to ask some leading questions, right? How, what is it that, what clue did you leave behind that will let that person know that it was you who took the backpack, right? Like those kinds of things, because now we need to make it interesting, right? So I like a leading question in those places to kind of fill in those gaps.
Cool. Rach, did you have anything else you wanted to throw in, or
just a side note? So realize that yes, we did mention there often is the bucket move or the catch-all move, as I like to call them. But there's also, if you want to kind of be a jerk as a GM or an MC, if you just let the players do things, that encourages them, and they'll do even more reckless and outlandish things as the game goes along. I mean, in this example, it's Monsterhearts. It's a story about teenagers who make bad decisions. Letting them get away with it once will actually be in line with the spirit of the game, because it's like, sure, you succeeded this time. There was no problem. Now, how are you going to up the stakes next time?
Nice. I'm going to throw in a couple thoughts, and one of them is a little controversial. I think of the catch-all move as the weakest part of every Powered by the Apocalypse game is the part where the game designer said, shit, I can't cover everything. Let's just put this here. And doing that for one thing is cool. But if you've got a backpack thief who wants to do this a lot, that is the player asking you for a custom move, right? That's where you go, well, is this a thing where we want to mechanize this? And at least the early first generation of Powered by the Apocalypse games, they talked about how to create custom moves. I've seen, more recent PbtA games don't dedicate some of the book to that, but you can always jump back to Urban Shadows is really great for that, and Apocalypse World 2nd Edition. Both are the two that I go to try to get some tips and tricks on custom moves. Or there's also this podcast where they had an episode Custom Moves Make the Game, plus one forward. Go back to way back in the feed, back in 2008, 2018, 2008. No, we weren't around then. So there's a question and answer for you, Sam. We are coming near the end of our hour, but I'm going to finish off. We've got a question here from Blake Ryan, author of Don't Pay the Ferryman, Powered by the Apocalypse game that uses 2d8, guys. Crazy. I love it. Here we go. How much investigation or descriptive analysis is required by the characters before investigate a mystery or place of power is rolled? Too quick, and this can shorten the session greatly.
Going.
Go for it, Rach.
All right, so your examples seem to be from Monster of the Week in Urban Shadows, because I play far too much urban fantasy. So I believe my memory is serving me correct there. So the moves trigger when the PC decides to investigate a situation. I mean, that's my position on it. There's no threshold in either game that tells the MC, okay, your PC has investigated enough so they can roll, or, oh, you didn't really investigate enough, you can't roll. There's no countdown clock or anything like that. Ask the PC to describe how they're investigating the scene. That will be your guideline in terms of what information you're going to give your PC based on their role. To use Urban Shadows, for example, and investigate a place of power, if your intrepid little aware, for example, is going to walk up to the actual building that's a place of power and do an investigation roll, that's going to get them different information than if they decide to go to the police department and look up reports about that building. And when the player character makes a successful roll, you don't have to give them everything. You just have to give them what makes sense for them to narratively get. And so this all said, my hot take time, I don't think Powered by the Apocalypse does full, deep, thorough investigations very well. You may need to take a step back and reflect on how you want to construct your sessions. I think in Monster of the Week and Urban Shadows in particular, do better if there's one or two little bits of information that are the investigation, and then you're more focused on what the player character is going to do with that information now that they have it, rather than going around looking for clues. You have gumshoe for that.
Yes, so much. Yes, Rach. Phil, MK, either of you have some stuff? MK, anything you want to throw in?
Sure. Yeah, I think, like Rach said, first rely on the triggers. If they describe something that's investigative, then they have triggered the move. If you want more from them, then just ask for it. Sounds like you're investigating a place of power. Can you tell us more about what that looks like? Secondly, I'd say look to their playbooks. And this is sort of like just like a tip for being an extra cool GM. And look at their playbooks and see if they have something that makes them better at this that they aren't doing. So like if they're just not used to their playbook yet, or they just keep forgetting that they have this entire section on the other side, you can ask, do you want to investigate a place of power here? And it's okay to sort of push them towards the thing that they're really good at, or that they might want to have been doing but have forgotten exists. But if those feel like they're killing the tension for your game, I would suggest leaning on playing to find out what happens a little bit more heavily. Rolling the move doesn't actually mean that the atmosphere of the place is going to change necessarily. So if you're in creepy catacombs, you're still going to be in those creepy catacombs after you answer the questions that they pick off of the list. It's just that those players have a new position in relation to that place. So that goes both ways, where it's like, maybe they're like, oh, is this a place of power? And I'm like, yes, now it is. Scroll. And so when they pick the question, it prompts me, the GM, to come up with something cool about this place that is now true, that should have been true all along, but now I get to tell them like whose machinations are like really driving this plot, or why there are catacombs here at all, or whatever.
Nice. I like that. Phil, anything you wanted to?
Yeah, not too much on that. I think that I think in terms of the threshold for the move, you trigger it when you trigger it. How much information you give, and what information you give, right? So early discoveries and things like that should lead to other places to find. Like, I don't know, this is my shortcut. Like, a lot of people will go with, this move yields you information that gets you closer to the end of the story. But one of the things I like to do, and I model this a lot after Law and Order, is that early clues just lead you to new places to find better clues that get you towards really the heart of the matter. So that from a pacing perspective, you can give a decent amount of information. It's just that the information you give gets you to another place, or you need to do another thing in order to get to the real truth. And that will buy you a little bit of pacing. And then if you're adjusting this on the fly, like if you're running a one-shot, you can change that and just give a little more of the meaningful information in with that clue, right? So you have the option to what you put into that answer. And I think that's a part of what Rach said as well, right?
Can I interject and just add something else in here?
You bet.
I think what might be throwing some people off is, and I'm pretty sure it's an apocalypse world, they say something along the lines of you have to answer your questions truthfully, which I think gets misinterpreted into you have to give them the complete truth right now.
Right. Yeah. This is where I like that. This is where I really like that document, like that core piece of prep that I do, which is the what's really going on, because this is where I can kind of use that thing to be like, okay, well, what is this place, or what is, if I kind of like Marissa said, if I just decided this place was a place of power, how does it tie into the overall what we're trying to go for in the story? Cool. What can I pull from that? But yeah, Rach, like you said, truthful, yes. Complete is not what that move says. It does not say you have to answer completely.
Yeah, true. And my thoughts on this are, again, this is a person who, think of me as a person allergic to peanuts who's describing to you a Reese cup. I give you all the information. You trigger the move, you ask the question, you get all the answers, because I'm way more interested in knowing what you do with the knowledge about this mystery and place of power than I am about you going down the breadcrumb trail that I'm laying for you. Like, I want to see what you do when you understand that it is a vampire who's in control of this place. Or, oh, it turns out that this is a relic of an ancient religion and the angels right behind you. Those are way more interesting to me, the selfish GM. So how much invest? All of it. 110%. Like, I'll give you more. Like, you want a second helping of answer? Here you go. That's what I do. But, that's because of my bent towards mysteries give me hives. So friends, thank you all so much for giving us an hour of your valuable time and your expertise on GMing or MCing powered by the Apocalypse Games. As we head out here, I'd like to just get from each of you where we can find you or follow you. So Phil, where can we find out more? We've been inspired by you. Where do we find more, Phil?
So you can always find me on Twitter at DNAPhil, and you can find me Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. On the Misdirected Mark streaming, the streaming version of the podcast, or you can always pick up the Misdirected Mark podcast or Pandas Talking Games wherever you get your podcasts.
Awesome. And Rach, where can we find you?
You can find me twice a month, if not more frequently, on +14, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse. You can also seek me out on Twitter at TEDDog. So that is TEDDOG.
Awesome. And then MK, where can we find you?
Like you said earlier, I'm one of the co-owners of Magpie Games, so magpiegames.com or info@magpiegames.com. If you want to meet up or say something, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And thanks everybody for the active listeners and all the great questions that we got to make this panel go. Have a great rest of your GauntletCon, everybody.
And thanks for your moderation and insight, Rich.
Yeah, thank you, Rich.
Thanks, Rich.